Hi, I'm Daniel Nyman. On behalf of the Forum for Healthcare Strategists, as well as today's sponsor, SXM Media, welcome and thank you for joining us. We are looking forward to an enlightening look at sonic tonics and how they can contribute to healthcare marketing strategy. It's no secret that brands today are facing strong economic headwinds. Fortunately, there's a wealth of data and experience that can help them weather the storm. Today's webinar will offer a prescription for your brand's health, exploring 3 sonic tonics that can help you not only survive a recession, but thrive on the other side. Here to help us examine the importance of audio and helping healthcare brands achieve marketing goals are Steve Keller and Anna Clement. Steve is the Sonic Strategy Director for Studio Resonate, SXM Media's in-house audio-first creative agency. Anna is SXM Media's Director of Healthcare. A couple of notes before we begin. First, if you would like to ask a question, please enter it into the question and answer pane located on the bottom of your screen at any time. Steve and Anna will respond to as many questions as they can in the time we have. Secondly, we will be conducting several audience polls during the program, so please be sure to participate when those appear on your screen. With that, I'll turn the program over to Anna Clement to kick us off. Anna?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to the forum for giving us this time today. I'm really excited to have Steve Keller share his research with you all. Steve is somewhat of a celebrity in the streaming audio marketing world, and he brings a really unique perspective based on multiple studies he's done exploring the connection between audio and health. He also has a ton of experience working across a variety of industries where he's helped major brands develop audio marketing strategies to connect with consumers in a really human way. And ultimately, I think you'll walk away with some new thought starters that are out of the box for your own brand campaigns that can be especially helpful in today's, in a time of so much economic uncertainty and challenges. So Steve and I both work for SXM Media. And for those of you who may not be familiar, SXM Media is the newly formed ad sales group comprised of Pandora Streaming, SiriusXM Satellite, and Stitcher Podcast. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for marketers to reach 150 million people all across the United States. So we brought the best of all audio under one roof to form what we now call SXM Media. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we'll quickly introduce ourselves. Thank you, Steve, for this visual pun. My name is Anna Clement. I sit here in Chicago, and I'm the director of our healthcare vertical. SXM has had a dedicated healthcare vertical going on 8 years. Partnering with healthcare marketers is a huge priority for our company. We work with health systems, hospitals, state departments of health, health insurers, anything health and wellness related. And healthcare marketers like partnering with us for a variety of reasons, but most notably, it's our massive listener base of 150 million people, which enables hospitals to get, have meaningful scale on a local level. And then the fact that we offer HIPAA compliant targeting, as well as the connection between audio and health that Steve is going to dive into. Steve, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Anna. I'm Steve Keller. My bio is up there. You can read that. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what Sonic Strategy is in a moment. But as Daniel mentioned, I work with in Studio Resonate, which is a audio-first creative consultancy. We work with all the brands that advertise on all of our platforms, the Sirius Satellite Network, Pandora, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. So I am excited to be here with you today and to share stuff that I'm passionate about. So, you get me talking and it's hard to get me to shut up, but I'm going to stay in our timeline today. We're going to start, though, with a poll. So we're going to put a poll up for you to take in this survey, and we're going to start with the first question here. So Anna, if you'd like to introduce that.
Yes, thank you. So do you have a dedicated audio marketing strategy for your healthcare brand? Yes, no, but we're working on it. No, and no plans to do so. Wait a minute as the answers come in.
I feel like there should be some witty banter back and forth at this
I
point
know,
while
yeah.
people are filling it out.
I'm curious to see what people say because
Yeah,
I've asked this question. Oh, come through? Okay, so 23% of people say yes, they do have an audio marketing strategy for their healthcare brand. 54% say no, but we're working on it. And 23% say no and no plans to do so. I think this is interesting because, I've asked this question in real life at conferences. But before I ask it, I always ask, how many of you listen to streaming music or podcasts? And every single person in the room always raises their hand. And then I follow it up with how many of you have a dedicated audio marketing strategy for your brand. And there's inevitably some discrepancy. So you can see there's so much opportunity in this space when it comes to healthcare advertising.
Great. Well, let's ask one more, see where we wind up with this one. In today's economic climate, are you prioritizing brand campaigns, lower funnel campaigns, or both? So there's the poll. The questions are the answer is branding campaigns, lower funnel campaigns, or both. As a strategist, I'm going to be really interested to see what the responses are here. So lock in the votes. We'll see what the responses are here in a moment. All right. We've got 42% branding campaigns. Wow, 0 just lower funnel campaigns. I actually think that's a good thing, and I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. And 58% concentrating on both. I'm actually really encouraged by these numbers, and you all will see why in a moment. So with that out of the way, and providing a little bit of context with those questions, let's just dive into our presentation now. Before we get started, I just want to say a little bit about Sonic Strategy, a little bit about the things that I do, because inevitably, when people hear my title, Sonic Strategy Director, 2 things happen. The first thing is people say, that's a really cool title. And it is, I love it. But the second thing they say, but I don't understand, what do you do? So the easiest way that I've come up with describing Sonic Strategy is that's the process of actually taking sound science, blending it with sound art in order to make sound decisions. And I mean that literally and figuratively. We use sound a lot in our marketing, and it's always interesting to me to ask folks about why they make the decisions that they make, the voiceover that they choose, a piece of music that they choose, sound design, where they choose to put their audio. And I'm really in the business of kind of leaning into the science of sound and the art of producing that sound and blending those 2 things together to help clients just make better decisions about how they're using sound. And for me, that winds up being 3 different things that I concentrate on. The first thing is sonic identity and marketing, how you as a brand might use sound to identify your brand. Think of that with your visual branding. You've got visual marks, you've got brand claims, a lot of times type styles. All of these things are part of a visual identity for your brand. And sonically, you can do the same thing. You can lean into sonic logos, a particular brand voice, brand themes, functional sounds. There's a lot of ways to do that. And certainly, sonic marketing is how you use sound in your marketing. So we'll touch on a little bit of that in the conversation today. Another area that I concentrate on are sonic experiences, which usually end up being fun ways that we can use sound to excite people, get people interested in what we're doing. One of the example of that most recently was for 6 months, I played hip hop music to cheese while it aged to see if I could actually change the molecular structure of the cheese. It was really about the vibrations hitting the microorganisms as they developed. And believe it or not, that cheese tasted different. It smelled different. It had a different texture. And we turned that into some limited edition boxes of Cheez-It. So those are the fun sonic experiences that I get to play with. And the last area that I play in are sonic interventions. And that's where we look at the world around us, culture, society, ways that sound might be a solution to a problem that we're facing, or a way to improve and amplify a common good. And certainly this is the area that intersects with healthcare for me. And we'll bring that to life in a bit here when we talk about our sonic tonics. So with that as a little bit of an introduction about me and some of the things that I'm doing and playing with, let's get into the bulk of the presentation today. So I want to start by just painting a picture for how sound impacts us. I like to say we're wired for sound, and I mean that quite literally in terms of the way our neural pathways are put together. You know, the neural pathways for sound are much less complex than for sight. That enables sound to get into our ears and to the precortical areas of our brain where our emotions live much faster than sight. In fact, reflexively, we respond to sound 20 to 100 times faster than we do to a visual stimulus. So sound has a very quick impact on our physiology and our psychology. So without taking too much time, I just want to run through a few of the ways that sound impacts us. First of all, I mentioned our physiology. There are all kinds of neurochemicals and hormones that are triggered as a result of sound, things like dopamine, oxytocin, cortisol. We can see our heart rates changing in terms of differences to tempos and rhythms. When we sing music together, when we move in time with the beat, oxytocin is produced. That makes us feel like we belong to a group. It increases pro-social behavior. And certainly dopamine that gets triggered when we have a rewarding experience. That happens with music all the time. It's why we have particular tunes that we lean into, songs that we like to listen to over and over and over again. There's that drip of dopamine that's happening. So there's a physiological response there. And obviously, there's emotional triggers. You know, we have the soundtrack of our lives where we can look back at events and associate different sounds and pieces of music there that evoke emotions for us. And not only emotions, but also memories. Sound is a really good memory device. It's why when we learn our ABCs, we're usually learning it to a little melody, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And in my world, when we talk about jingles or sonic logos, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, you know the brand, McDonald's, or bum, 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 bum for Intel. These are all just little memory triggers that when we use sound, evokes these memories, brings the brand's top of mind. And sound also affects our perception. One of the areas that I do a lot of research in is cross-modal associations. That's basically the combination of sensory input that helps us make sense, literally, of the world around us, and how I can hack your senses with sound, particularly in the area of food. So I've done a lot of research around flavor perception and how I can change your perception of the taste of chocolate, making it taste a little more bitter or a little more sweet, depending on how I'm priming your brain with sonic seasonings, particularly ways that we would put soundscapes together. And then sound also affects meaning. It provides a context, a narrative for us. We can see this often in films. If you think about the soundtrack to a film, how it telegraphs the action and something that's happening. There's even evidence from some of my other research that there's the existence of something I would call an audio archetype. There's a reason why there's particular kinds of music that we associate with a hero, or maybe with a caregiver or a lover. So music and sound provides meaning and context for us. And then finally, it's easy to understand. You combine all of these things and sound does affect our behavior. In a marketing sense, it can affect the products that we choose off of a shelf. It can affect how much time we're spending in a particular area in a store. It can affect the quickness with which we can identify a product, or in those memory triggers hit, how quickly a product can come to mind. So it stands to reason you put all of these things together, and sound can also have an impact on our health and well-being. So I want to move into this sonic tonics section, which is just my clever way of referring to the way sound can impact the way we feel, impact our health, impact our mental health, and our well-being. There was a piece of research that I did in 2019 with Charles Spence, who's the head of the Cross-Modal Research Laboratory at Oxford. We're going to send you a little takeaway sheet afterwards, where we're going to give you a lot of notes from this presentation, but there's a link to this study where Charles and I looked at research where soundscapes and music and noise appeared in healthcare settings, and the impact that that had on patient satisfaction, as well as the treatment outcomes. So it's a pretty extensive study. We have about 250 references, I think, in this, so it's a great literature review. And I felt like for this presentation, we're going to talk about brands in a second, but I wanted to leave you with a few personal sonic tonics. These are all things that are based on the research, things that I use a lot in mitigating my own health and wellness. So I wanted to pass a few of those along to you to think about using. So first, sonic tonic is about mood. We talked a little bit earlier about emotion, and certainly music in particular has a way of impacting our moods. And that's because of the way music is structured, with pitch and tempo, modality. By that, I mean, is it major or minor? Harmony, is the harmony consonant? Does it fit, or is it dissonant? You combine all of those things in different ways, and it does have an emotional impact. If you have a higher pitch, a faster tempo, a major key, that tends to be something that we associate with a positive mood, maybe excitement, depending on how high the tempo is, or certainly pleasure and happiness. Slow that tempo down a little bit, still keep it in a major key, drop the pitch just a little, and that's starting to induce feelings of calmness and relaxation. If we start moving a little bit more to a minor key, kind of keep the pitch low, make the articulation of the notes connected. We would call that in musical terms legato. Now we're getting into things that might produce a sense of melancholy or sadness. So we can use these building blocks of sound in selecting music, putting together playlists that help match our mood. And that's what I would encourage you to do. You don't need to think about trying to modify or change your mood with music. Just lean into music that kind of fits how you're feeling. And this is particularly true if you might find yourself feeling sad or melancholy. The instinct might be to move towards that happy music, but all the research says that if you actually lean into that melancholy with sound, that the results of that is that it can kind of ease you out of that space because there's a positive response that your body has to that. In fact, an interesting piece of research suggested that maybe prolactin is produced because the brain is getting primed with these more melancholy sounds. And that prolactin is a hormone that's been shown to mitigate grief. So use sound to kind of create an emotional context for yourself. And then think about when you get up in the morning. I think sometimes we might be tempted to use loud alarms to wake us up. But when you first wake up, your brain is in a fight or flight mode. And if you use those really loud sounds, it can be a shock to the system. So try and stay away from really loud alarms. Maybe lean into nature sounds, lean into a piece of music that maybe has a rhythm, but kind of bring you out of sleep and into the day in a way that's much more natural and isn't quite as jarring. Let's think a little bit about focus. If you need to concentrate on something that you're doing, we found that using music that has a very consistent rhythm, something that's very repetitive, has a way of focusing the brain. Finding things that has a beats per minute around 50 to 80 tempo seems to be the prime range for helping concentration. And also try to avoid music that has lyrics in it, because your brain is going to be kind of processing those lyrics in the background. Might be less so if it's a familiar song. If it's something that you've not heard before and there's lyrics there, your brain really will start to focus more on the lyrics and make it difficult for the task at hand. But kind of lean into that repetitive music, and also nature sounds. Nature sounds can provide a little bit of distraction in the background, but not so much so that your brain can't focus. And researchers found that those natural sounds can really help us focus too. Also, sleep. So you started your day, you're focusing in the middle. Now you need to get to sleep at night. This is pretty intuitive. If you play some music that's relaxing before you drift off to sleep, that can really kind of help bring your body tempo down. Unlike with focus, where you want to have very repetitive music, that's not what you want to listen to when you go to sleep. In fact, if any of you scroll through TikTok, that's the worst thing you can do before you go to bed, because you get into these repetitive hooks, particularly with a lot of times the music and the sound is very repetitive, and your brain starts a feedback loop there. And what we've seen from the research is even when you turn it off, there's still these memories and this echo of your brain in these loops. So try to avoid anything too hooky and repetitive. And you might even try using some kind of white noise or pink noise that will mask distractions in the background, help you sleep better. Pink noise, some recent research suggests that actually using pink noise may be better in terms of memory function. There's some studies that tend to suggest that prolonged listening to white noise over time can have an adverse effect on memory. And then there's nutrition. I mentioned flavor. There's other things with sound that we have discovered, particularly around loudness. If you go to a restaurant that's really loud, you will tend to consume more food. So drop the volume down, have the music be a little more relaxed. And we found that you can cut your caloric intake up to 18%. And if you want the really extreme sonic tonic for diet, eat with earplugs. We found that if you have earplugs in, we think it's probably you're not as distracted by the environment. You're getting in tune with your own mastication. When your body is full, you're not distracted by any other cues, and you'll tend to eat up to 30% less calories. And finally, connection. Our health and wellness is really tied to our social well-being as well. Fascinating study done by Apple and Sonos in 30 homes. They did a baseline of no music in the homes for a week, and then brought music to life in the homes. And what they found was that music decreased the distance that people were spending apart from each other by 12%. So people were actually moving closer together. There was 15% more laughter that was occurring in these homes. People started saying, I love you 18% more. And the intimacy in the space grew a whopping 66%. In fact, they found that people were spending 37% more of their awake time in bed. And we'll let you imagine what awake time was all about. And certainly during COVID, I was part of a small research group around the world looking at the impact of music and sound and singing during COVID. And we found that music was a real balm. It served as a social surrogate. It brought people together. I mentioned oxytocin before, when people were singing in groups out of their balconies. So all of these sonic tonics are ways that are really powerful in affecting our health and well-being. So now I want to move from personal sonic tonics and move into talking about sonic tonics in the context of marketing, and specifically marketing in an age of uncertainty. We have lived for a while with the stories of the economic headwinds, the things that we have to think about as brands and marketers. And so I've chosen out of the standard research that exists, 3 main principles that I think are really important for us to think about, just marketing in general. But then I'm going to bring those to life, talking about sonic tonics for our brand, sonic prescription, if you will. Excuse me. So use your voice. This is the first thing to think about. And when I'm speaking about voice, talking about share of voice. We know from the research that your share of voice is correlated to your share of market. If you take that share of voice and increase it, brands tend to grow their market share. On the flip side, if you begin to lose your share of voice, your share of market begins to shrink. And if we think about this in the context of facing economic hardship, the temptation is to pull back on advertising budgets. But all the research has shown that if you do that and you drop that share of voice, it's really hard to make it up on the other side of that. So you need to lean into that share of voice. And we think that sound is a great way to do that. We know that a lot of folks have replaced TV time with podcasts. We saw this really balloon during COVID. And it seems like on the other side of that pandemic, people are still leaning into podcasts, living with that audio. It's a great place to increase your share of voice cost effectively. And folks have moved more to consuming ad-supported content. We've even seen this in the video world with some of the streaming formats beginning to introduce ads. Basically, consumers, particularly on free tiers, know that being served an ad is a part of that. And they're certainly open to listening to an ad in order to hear the content that they want to hear. So audio is a real great cost-effective way to maintain and even increase your share of voice, particularly if you need to try and shift some of your spend around. Music, sound, and voice gets us through an entire day. If you think back on the sonic tonics that I just shared, we started at the beginning of the day, we worked through the middle of the day when you might be working and needing to focus, sleeping at the end of the day, all the things that are happening in your home where ears are open and it's an opportunity to reach an audience. So audio is a really effective way to break through, to maintain and increase that share of voice and kind of defend your market share at the same time. And finally, audio gives you a little more bang for your marketing bucks. It's easy to produce. It's usually less of a spend than some other media. You can test it very quickly. optimize it, and change it very quickly. And so again, I think there are a lot of opportunities to use audio to defend your voice and your market share at the same time. The second principle is to go long. Now, this relates back to the question that we asked in the poll earlier, and I'm actually encouraged to see where a lot of folks fell in that particular poll. The market research here, when we take a look at two kinds of approaches to marketing, sales activation or more performance-based marketing versus long-term brand building. There were two researchers by the name of Les Binet and Peter Field who looked at about 900 different brands in hundreds of different categories and analyzing the econometric data over 30 years. So they really wanted to look at the financial effects of short-term sales activation messaging versus long-term brand building. And what they found was that the short-term messaging certainly was effective. You would see the lift in sales and response to calls to action, fairly quick fall off until you hit them again with another sales activated type of message. And it was effective. But when they looked at long-term brand building, what they discovered was naturally in the beginning, you didn't see as much of a sales lift, but over time, you reached a point of critical mass where ultimately what Peter and Les found was that brands that leaned more into building the brand over time generated twice the revenue. Now, I want to make sure you understand, I'm not saying not to do your sales activation. That's really important, but it's really about a mix. And Peter and Les looked at a 60-40 mix at most of these brands being the most effective. In other words, 60% of the messaging was designed for long-term brand building, 40% designed for short-term sales activation. Different categories, different mixes, but in all of them, it was leaning heavier into brand building. And there's a reason for that. It's the way our brains work. You know, we can talk about left brain, right brain. I like to say that it's not that the two sides of our brains are different. It's just that they do things differently. And on this left side of our brain, or more of what we might call system 2 thinking, this is where targeting, information, and physical availability are really important. That's the processing that it's triggered when we're trying to get that sale with that short-term messaging. But brand building long-term taps into the right functioning system 1, where we're talking about broad reach, we're talking about making emotional connection, building mental availability. And now think of this in the context of the funnel. And I'm going to reframe the funnel for you a little bit based on more current marketing research. Rather than thinking about it as awareness, thinking about it as brand building. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create memory structures, create this mental availability. And as we move into the middle part of the funnel, this is about continuing to find ways to nudge these memory structures that we've built. And you do that nudging enough so that when a consumer is at a place where they're ready to make a purchase, you can connect them to your brand in this lower part of the funnel. And certainly performance and brand marketing play a role all the way through the funnel. You may lean into brand building a little bit more in the upper to middle parts of the funnel and lean into your sales activation and the connections in the lower part of the funnel. But the wonderful thing about audio is that it works in all of these ways. We certainly can use audio as sales activation. And unfortunately, this is where audio often gets relegated. If you think about audio first advertising on radio or streaming networks, very often it's wall-to-wall VO. It's all about a price point or a particular promotion, instead of using audio and the power of audio to really tell stories. You can create emotional connections with sound that really can benefit you over the long term. This is where you can lean into some of those memory structures, a consistent use of a voice or a piece of music or a sonic logo. As you build those memory structures, you can use these to nudge the consumer throughout their journey when they're hearing the brand in different contexts. And that really allows you to play to both sides of the brain. Audio is quite literally effective at playing to your brain in that way. So think about the long term and think about how you might use audio as a strategy to reach consumers over time and build those connections emotionally with them. And then finally, get creative. I love Miles Davis, and this is one of my favorite quotes of Miles when someone asked him about his approach to playing. He says, "Don't play what's there, play what's not there." And Les Binet, who I mentioned earlier, took a look at creativity, and he found that creative was really just as important as media. He said that you can make your budget go 11 times further. And certainly we found that the use of music and sound in commercials, when it's congruent and fits the brand and fits the message, can increase the effectiveness of that advertising 20 to 30%. So we talk a lot about data. I think data is important, but I tend to take the Miles Davis approach to data, which is sometimes what you really need to look at is playing not just what's there, but what's not there. So think about that in the context of a sonic tonic for your brand. Creatively lean into storytelling. Sound can create those emotional connections. Certain sounds bring back memories of things in our childhood, can certainly impact us across multiple cultures. So think about how you can use sound to tell a story about your brand, not simply to communicate information. Think about how sound might offer an experience. When Charles and I did our research onto the impact of soundscapes, music, and noise in healthcare environments, there was a lot of research to speak to the fact that using sound to create a pleasant experience for caregivers as well as patients actually improved outcomes. Think about the soundscape of a hospital. There's a lot of work that's being done right now in dealing with alarms and alarm sounds. We found a lot of evidence of post-traumatic stress syndrome that's actually been caused by the sound of the environment. So people are working to create sounds that can communicate to caregivers what they need to know, while at the same time not creating a cacophony of dissonance that can trigger unpleasant experiences. So think about how you can use sound to offer experiences beyond just advertising on a platform. And then audio is great to be able to take advantage of variable links. And this is particularly true in digital advertising. You want to tell a story, maybe you need a little bit more time. Maybe you want to take 30 seconds. Maybe you want to take 60 seconds. When you get to that point of connection where maybe you need just a CTA, you want to drive somebody to look for some more information or to find something else out on a website, maybe that's a shorter length of time. Maybe that's 6 seconds or 10 seconds. And in digital audio, you're not limited to just buying a 30-second spot for everything. You can switch that up. You can do a little bit of both, as we saw that a lot of you are concentrating on through the course of a day. Hit those short-term goals that you're looking for and building the brand long-term at the same time. And there's also a way to adjust dynamically to contexts in digital audio. We certainly have ways of taking a look at signals that we're getting from the data. that might be where you are in a particular region of the country, maybe your listening habits, the things that you're already listening to, maybe the time of day. And you can create an ad that will dynamically adjust to what's going on in a listener's environment, or where the signals tend to suggest they are at that moment in time, and making your ad congruent to fitting the context and their mood that we saw was very important in our own personal sonic tonic and health and well-being. And then you can amplify your returns with your creativity through optimization. Audio is really easy to test these days. When I first got into this work 20 years ago, there were very few companies that were really looking at robust ways of measuring audio in an advertising context. And that has changed dramatically. We work with a number of vendors who concentrate specifically on audio, and we can pre-test very quickly before you even get to market how the relationship of a particular voiceover with a particular script, with a particular piece of music, with particular sound design, all plays together to increase ad favorability, drive intent and engagement. And these are all things that you can look at very quickly and optimize your creative even before you get to market. So lean into that creativity. If you do all of these things, use your voice, go long, get creative, particularly in a time of economic uncertainty, it'll help you not just survive, but to actually thrive. And think about it this way. In these times of economic uncertainty, as you're leaning into building your brand more than to just short-term activation, you're really preparing for the recovery on the other side. All the evidence shows us that brands that stick to the plan of leaning into building those emotional connections at a time when consumers might be a little less likely to spend, when you get to the other side of those economic hardships and people are ready to spend more, you've built the kind of memory that you can activate and connect them and increase your bottom line. So some sonic tonics for you personally. I encourage you to try those out. When we send you the link, we'll send you the takeaway sheet. There'll be a link to an article that I wrote that will wrap these up for you as well. And also a link to another article where I'll go through the sound marketing in the age of uncertainty principles as well in a little bit more depth than I did today. So I hope that this was interesting, entertaining, that you'll find the applications in a lot of different ways, that maybe you'll go through the world today, listening to it differently, thinking about how it's impacting how you're feeling and your own health and well-being. I really thank you for taking the time out today to spend with us. So we're going to switch to question mode so we can take a few questions and answers. Anna can come off of her mute, and we'll take a look at a few of these in the time that we have left. So Anna, it looks like how does podcasting fit into an audio marketing strategy? I think, why don't you take that one?
That is a great question. And we have seen so many healthcare marketers have really embraced podcasting as a medium in terms of advertising. And it really makes a ton of sense. So 1 in 5 podcast listeners have made a doctor's appointment as a direct result of hearing a podcast ad. It's a very highly insured population. 92% of podcast listeners have health insurance, and studies show they over-index for making appointments across a variety of service lines. And one of the reasons for that is the podcast environment is very conducive to healthcare messaging because listeners are there to learn something. Studies show that, podcast advertising scores really high on being informative, interesting, relevant, trustworthy when compared to other mediums like television or, social. And then a primary reason, and I'm sure you can all relate to this if you listen to podcasts yourself, is that podcast listeners are so loyal to the podcasts and the hosts that they listen to. And that love and affinity really carries over to the brands that are supporting the medium. And then, because of that connection, respect and connection, listeners are more receptive to podcast ads than any other medium, as I referenced earlier. So very powerful complement to any streaming music campaign. There's also minimal overlay in terms of reach. So it's pretty much exclusive incremental reach if you add podcasting to a music campaign. And I'm happy to sidebar with anyone to talk about how that would work in your local market. Hopefully that gave you some food for thought. And then I think, is there one more question? What are some real life examples of healthcare brands that have successfully implemented audio strategies to amplify their brand and maximize return on investments? Another great question. I always love, and we've presented at conferences together, so I feel like I can share this. UCLA Health is a great example of a brand that they've never done streaming audio before. And during the pandemic, they really recognized the need to utilize a new tactic in order to reach and resonate with, who today's healthcare consumer is. And as we know, they're spending a lot less time with traditional media and spending a lot more time with digital, especially streaming audio. So we've run a variety of service line campaigns for UCLA that combine both upper and lower funnel. So upper funnel audio brand spots with lower funnel display and video ads on our platform. We've layered in HIPAA compliant targeting, and that combination has really helped them drive brand awareness and conversions really efficiently, sometimes, even more efficiently than social in many cases. So that's, I think, one of a silver lining about with streaming audio, especially during tight economic times, is that you really drive both upper and lower funnel, thanks to just the medium itself. So we can, accomplish your branding initiatives as well as your, drive appointments on the lower funnel end.
Yeah. And I would add to that too, that, there are a number of brands, particularly on the pharma brands, that have leaned into audio branding. So a few of them developing little mnemonics or leaning into a piece of music that someone might know. And those obviously build memory structures. You think of Ozempic, for instance. I, right at this point in time, couldn't tell you exactly what that drug is all about, but I definitely remember, oh, that little jingle that they have. And if I was looking for that particular drug, it would certainly be one that would pop up top of mind and more than likely affect my choice. So I don't know that I could give you a specific brand in the healthcare world that's doing it better than anybody else, but I am encouraged by seeing more brands think about this more. And then I see Alex's question there, especially with things as intangible as health and sound. How can you quantify the direct effect of music versus other factors? Obviously, you can test academically in the article that Charles and I wrote. There's certainly a number of academic studies where they have been able to isolate the sound components and actually look at the outcomes, both in patient satisfaction and both in the outcomes of the treatments that are there. So by applying standard methodologies in setting up controls and experimental groups, we can certainly measure these effects. And then when we get into advertising, it's really no different. You can certainly set up ways to look at ad favorability and effectiveness there. Yes, there are all kinds of mitigating things that can happen that can affect an outcome, particularly in healthcare and treatment. But there is more and more research being done in a bona fide clinical environment where there's a high degree of significance, high p-values that are able to be obtained. And I would encourage you to look through the citations in the paper and the link that we'll send you, because that will give you a wealth of information and lead you down a number of rabbit holes.
All right.
All right.
That's it for the Q&A. Daniel, are we passing it over to you for some closing remarks?
Yep. Thank you so much, Anna. I'm sure the audience joins me in thanking you and Steve for sharing your insights today. And to all of you in our audience, thank you for taking the time to join us. Please be on the lookout, as we'll be sending out a link to the webinar recording and the other takeaway documents mentioned earlier in the next few days. That concludes today's program. We hope to see you at a future forum webinar. Please visit the forum website, healthcarestrategy.com, to view the upcoming schedule. Finally, be sure to give us your feedback by completing the evaluation survey as you exit the webinar. Thank you and have a great day.